There is a moment that every professional athlete dreads. It's not the bad performance or the losing streak, but the subtle, persistent fear that you might be judged unworthy today. For Lexie Hull, that feeling wasn't fleeting. Neither the week nor the time frame were challenging. It occurred every night for 2 years. And nobody outside that Indiana Fever locker room realized how terrible it truly was. Her narrative stands out from all the others that have come out of the WNBA's most turbulent, intriguing, and explosive era because of this. Because as everyone else saw Caitlin Clark break records and sell out stadiums throughout the country, Lexie Hull was quietly going through one of the most incredible personal changes in women's basketball history. From a man on the verge of losing everything to one of the most legitimately compelling personalities in the league. When she finally decided to talk candidly about what that experience was like from the inside out, folks were taken aback by what she disclosed. But before any of that made sense, you had to understand just where Lexie Hull came from. The 2022 WNBA draft seemed like a dream on paper. Alumnus of Stanford, national champion, 3 All-Pac, 12 honors, 6th overall pick, and winner of the Elite 90 award for the highest level of academic and athletic achievement. Teams build around Lexie Hull's talent in every measurable manner. The kind of applicant whose credentials are so immaculate they practically shine. The draft night cameras did not record what she was entering. The Indiana Fever were a bad basketball team in 2022. They were among the worst clubs in the league by most measures. A culture that has been struggling to establish itself for years, losing seasons and missing out on the playoffs. For a rookie player trying to establish herself in a professional league, there might not be a more challenging environment than one where the team surrounding you is also fighting for survival. Every time you perform, it seems like an audition. Every lost chance seems like evidence. Every change has the ability to affect your future. Hull averaged less than 5 points each game in her first 2 seasons. Read that again for a moment. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel if you enjoy the content. It may surprise you to learn that almost 83% of viewers have not yet subscribed. Even though it only takes a second and is free, it means the world to us. Have you already subscribed? Fantastic. I sincerely appreciate your help. Let's return to the video now. A Stanford basketball player who had won a national championship and was selected in the top 10 of the draft was averaging fewer than 5 points per game. In her second season, she was still unable to consistently score more than 4 or 6 points, although playing more than 20 minutes every night. The numbers weren't only gloomy. These were the kinds of people that ended careers before they really got going. But just a part of the picture was given by the figures. No one outside that building could see what was happening within Lexie Hull's head. Athletes rarely talk candidly about fear. Professional sports have a rigorous culture that discourages that kind of sensitivity, especially for athletes who are still trying to fit in. Hull's story of those early years in an interview with Glamour magazine concluded differently than most athlete confessionals. She described moments when the fear of missing a shot was not limited to basketball. It has to do with getting by. In fact, she was concerned that one bad play on the floor, a missed opportunity, or a bad read at a crucial moment may result in her being completely eliminated from the roster. A Stanford graduate with a top 10 draft pedigree was lying awake at night, afraid that one missed jumper could end her career. That wasn't anxiety in the abstract sense. In a sense that went beyond the court, she called those formative years nerve-wracking. That was the real psychological burden of being a member of a losing team with no safety net and no room for error. Losing cultures has a specific effect on a player's emotional state. Without a playoff run to give the season meaning and a triumph to relieve the tough times, every mistake is magnified. The stakes appear to be high even though the circumstance isn't actually high. In addition, that environment was subtly detrimental in ways that were difficult for an outsider to understand for someone who was already affected, as well as for its clarity. She was fully aware of what had been happening to her. She recognized it. She was able to explain how the pressure had impacted her breathing, movement patterns, mechanics, and decision-making in real time during live games. Having that level of self-awareness is challenging. And it's crucial because it's exactly what made it possible for her to respond the way she did when everything around her suddenly and profoundly altered. In April 2024, the Indiana Fever selected Caitlin Clark with the first overall pick in the WNBA draft. Here is a brief summary of the significance of that occasion. In both men's and women's NCAA basketball history, Clark was the most prolific scorer. She turned Big Ten women's basketball into a reputable national television event during her 4 years at Iowa. She has smashed records that had stood for decades. She had sold out venues in places where women's collegiate basketball had never been played. She had made the Iowa Hawkeyes one of the most well-liked university sports teams in the country. And when she joined the WNBA, there was a simple but important question. Was any of this real? Or was it all a college bubble that would explode the instant she started playing professionally? The answer was prompt and unambiguous. Clark broke WNBA records in rookie performance, broadcast viewership, and fan interaction, making the preceding achievements appear almost unimportant. The Indiana Fever went from being one of the league's overlooked teams to the most talked about, controversial, and extensively covered club in women's sports overnight. Sellout audiences, national broadcasts, and a media presence accompanied the team everywhere they went. The Fever became a must-watch program, and the league as a whole realized this. But what happened inside the lines was what really mattered to the players who were already there. Furthermore, according to Lexie Hull, most casual viewers completely ignored Clark's achievements on the floor. A certain kind of player may change the game for everyone around them without necessarily influencing the box score themselves. Despite being a top scorer, Clark's most undervalued quality, at least in the perspective of her teammates, is more difficult to measure. She can read a defense several steps ahead of the actual action. Her innate ability to draw defensive attention and provide teammates with opportunities that materialize almost before the defense can respond to them. For Lexie Hull, that meant uncontested perimeter opportunities and open looks that weren't the consequence of a poor play or lucky rotation, something she hadn't experienced in her 2 full professional seasons. She was making the shots she had been practicing for years, the ones she knew how to make but had been too preoccupied to consistently make during games. And the results were immediate and spectacular. Hull had a 47% three-point shooting percentage in 2024. 1%. That wasn't simply a lifetime high. It was one of the league's greatest individual shooting efforts that season. In contrast, throughout her time at Stanford, her three-point shooting percentage was roughly 36 or 37%. She had returned to that figure, but as soon as she quit playing, she surpassed it entirely due to the psychological weight of a failing culture weighing down on every shot she made. She described the transformation in terms that was almost disarmingly simple. She knew there was going to be open fire. She knew that her effort had been sincere. Instead of holding on to every attempt as if it were her last, she gave herself permission to accept the outcome. You can't get that much mental freedom from any shooting coach or film session. It comes from believing in yourself, your teammates, and the system. Clark had given her the first 2. Had found the third on her own. But the court was only one facet of the change. Emerging from it was something equally unexpected. When Clark was drafted, there were real concerns about how she would fit into a locker room full of players who had already spent years building relationships and a sense of team identity. She was the sport's most famous athlete, the face of a franchise transformation, and the subject of more media attention than any WNBA player in recent memory. She spent 4 years at Iowa playing with teammates from her early years. Before all of this, before the records, before the national exposure, and before the impossible burden of expectations, she was well known to players like Kate Martin and Gabby Marshall. Indiana was different. These were professionals with their own careers, experiences, and nuanced feelings about the event's importance to the league and to them personally. Worry was real in some places. Would the seasoned players accept her? Would conflict result from the disparity in focus? Would the locker room be unable to support so much weight? It all started with Lexie Hull, and the truth was very different from what anyone had expected. The two clicked almost immediately, not in a slick, PR-managed way that is carefully crafted for public consumption, but in the genuine, slightly chaotic way that true friendships genuinely grow. They were hanging out off the court in Indianapolis, experimenting with drinks, and making videos for TikTok. Everyone could see that the two were intertwined when the WNBA sent players to Mexico during the Olympic break. This link was not created. It was real. By the time the 2025 season approached, the dynamic had grown into something with its own name and identity in WNBA culture. Following Sophie Cunningham's off-season trade to Indiana, Clark, Hull, and Cunningham began calling themselves the Trace Locks. The trio became one of the most entertaining and charming presences in the league. They caddied together during an LPGA Pro-Am. They were always making fun of each other on social media. Hull told People magazine, Clark could need more sun exposure, turning a set of photos from the Heat Media Day into one of the most humorous off-season events in the league's history. In a way that only works when both people are completely at ease with one another, Hull even posted a picture to Instagram with the caption, "We are so back," mocking Clark's famous pale skin. When the cameras aren't adequately controlled, it's the kind of friendship that gives viewers something rare in professional sports, a genuine look into the athletes' true selves. Then Hull confirmed what many had already surmised. Interviewers were told that Clark will be present at her wedding. That wasn't a joke. In April 2025, Will Matson, a former baseball player from Stanford who was selected in the 6th round of the 1919 MLB draft before retiring due to a series of illnesses, and Hull became engaged. Matson relocated to Indianapolis to be with Hull once she was picked. Stanford was where the two had first met. He gave up baseball, focused his life on her, and now he was at the center of one of the most important moments in her life. Caitlin Clark was supposed to be there as well. It's not a story for public relations. That one is real. But as all of this was happening, Hull was quietly preparing a statement that would cut through every positive article and well-placed Instagram photo. She was getting ready to be honest in a way that most players in her position would have utterly avoided. The 2025 WNBA season was anticipated with much anticipation. Clark was the most significant rookie in league history at the conclusion of her rookie campaign. Additionally, Hull had stated that there was no doubting the difference in her heading into year 2. There was a seriousness to Clark's presence that had never existed before. A sharpness and focus that demonstrated to all around her that she had completed her adjustment and was ready to assume leadership. It was evident that Clark had come ready to do business, Hull informed reporters before to the start of the season. It was felt by everyone in the immediate area. Through the first 7 games of 2025, Hull was by far the team's greatest player. She was leading the whole WNBA with a 3-point shooting percentage of above 55%. On average, she was scoring more than 10 points every game. The Fever looked like a team that had progressed, a cohesive team with real championship potential. Then the injuries started. First, Clark's quad, then her growth, and lastly a soft tissue issue that rendered her temporarily comatose. By July 15th, she had suffered 4 separate physical setbacks in just a few months. This one happened during a game for the Connecticut Sun. The picture from that evening was one of the best of the season. Giving it her all, Clark rose from the ground and sat on the seat with a towel over her face. Her forehead rested against the basket's framework. She seemed to be exerting every ounce of might to maintain her composure. Beside her, Lexie Hull was just sitting there silently. Hull then talked about that period of time with a transparency that was clearly deliberate. She said that Clark was frustrated in a way that only happens when your body doesn't cooperate with the demands of your head and work ethic. The physical deterioration was not due to a lack of effort. Stuff was despite an amount of stuff that was almost superhuman. Hull understood the importance of that difference. The Fever persisted and made it to the WNBA semifinals even though Clark was absent for long stretches of time. They took the eventual winner Las Vegas Aces to a Game 5 that needed overtime before Indiana's odyssey came to an end. Hull's contribution to the run was not particularly noteworthy. She had to defend the opposing team's top perimeter scorer every night. She was making the kind of two-way plays that kept games close when everything else was going wrong. While being the player her team needed rather than the player the cameras were most interested in, she was bearing the emotional weight of seeing her closest teammate suffer through one of the most difficult periods in her career. All of that was preparing for a moment that Hull had clearly been thinking about for a while. In October 2025, Hull was included in Glamour magazine's Women of the Year story, alongside some of the biggest names in sports and entertainment. It was a significant recognition for a player who had subtly become one of the league's most respected presences over the preceding 2 seasons. Most respondents expected the interview to be the kind of pleasant, professional, and athlete-friendly content that those attributes usually produce. A brief history, some seasonal observations, and maybe a quote on growth and camaraderie. In actuality, a quite different thing happened. On that stage, Hull said things that most athletes in her position would never say in public. She directly named the envy. She claimed that because of the Indiana Fever's media exposure, the cameras, the sponsorship deals, the national broadcasts, and the complete transformation of the team's image, there was real hostility from other areas in the league. She made it clear that fans and media commentators weren't the only ones who were envious of the Fever's change as a result of Caitlin Clark's presence. Other locker rooms were the source of it. Then she went on. She asserted that the Fever had heard it firsthand, not by hearsay or speculation. In the locker rooms, they had overheard players and opposing teams publicly declaring that they could not let Indiana to win, that there was nothing meaningful about the bullseye on the Fever's backs. It was deliberate and literal, and the contestants were saying it out loud. Think about what that means practically. Every Indiana Fever game is viewed by opponents as having an impact on the playoffs. Every game versus Clark and her teammates is more intense than usual during the regular season. The referees are closely examined each time Indiana takes the court. Every call, no call, and contact moment is recorded, examined, debated, and used as ammunition by people who have most likely never watched a professional basketball game. And each player on the Fever roster plays in such environment every night of the season. Lexie Hull had been living there for 2 years at the time of the interview. She had seen it personally, in real time, from the inside of the most-watched team in women's sports. She had noticed it in opponents' floor-based body language. She had been informed about it by others who were playing against her. Moreover, when she decided to talk about it, she did not do so as a grievance, a complaint, or an appeal for mercy. She responded to being the target by saying, "Fine. Use it. If the extra motivation other teams feel when they play Indiana makes them come in harder and more prepared, then good. Everyone deserves to face the best version of their opponents." The Fever think they get that every night, and Hull's attitude was basically, bring it. It was to treat it as a prerequisite for competing at the level she had selected. That is not a minor issue. That is a very uncommon trait in professional sportsmen, particularly those who have every reason to be resentful of their surroundings. It was the most candid statement made by anyone associated with the Indiana Fever regarding the true expenses of living in Caitlin Clark's society, and it gained traction because it came from someone who had gained the authority to make such a statement. The image that appears when you take a step back and consider Lexie Hull's entire life story is one that is worth pondering for a while. As a truly talented player on a slowly collapsing team, she entered the professional ranks. She battled for a roster position for 2 years, averaging numbers that didn't match her skill level and enduring a psychological climate that was gradually eroding the confidence she had come with. She was afraid. Almost no one outside those confines realized how bad things had gotten for her. Then the greatest disruptive force in women's basketball history entered the building and simultaneously altered every aspect. The culture of the team changed. The profile of the franchise skyrocketed. Hull's own game was released from its mental captivity. She made 47% of her three-pointers. On a club that went from lottery-bound to semi-final contender, she established herself as a viable two-way contributor. She established one of the league's most sincere and obvious friendships. Her unmanufactured blend of genuine performance and genuine personality, rather than marketing or personal branding, made her a household figure in WNBA circles. And she did it while telling the truth about how everything truly appeared on the inside. The terror of those formative years. The liberation of having a playmaker like Clark at her side. The emotional strain of witnessing a close friend suffer injury after injury at the hands of her own body. The fact that every opponent views your squad as an enemy. She discussed everything. Not in the meticulously orchestrated manner that public relations departments craft athlete interviews to be, but in a straightforward, unambiguous, and relatable manner that truly connects with those who are paying attention. That's what sets her story apart from the other ancillary accounts surrounding Caitlin Clark's career. This is not a tale about being close to celebrity. It tells the tale of how someone responds to that closeness, whether they grow into it or shrink away from it, whether they blend in with the background noise or discover their own voice amid the mayhem. Lexie Hull discovered hers. Furthermore, it is even more fascinating than it would have been in any more subdued setting because she discovered it in one of the loudest, most intense settings that women's sports have ever created. What comes next is the question at hand. For the first time in her professional career, Hull was a restricted free agent going into the 2025 offseason. She has never experienced any uncertainty like that. When she was younger, it was unclear if she would be selected for the squad. The question now is whether the team she helped create will be able to retain her. Given her contributions in 2025, the league expects Indiana to do whatever it takes to keep her, and the Fever have the right to match any offer she receives from another team. However, professional sports are rarely as straightforward as the situation's logic would imply. The complexities of the WNBA's collective bargaining environment make things unclear for all parties. Hull herself acknowledged that she had no idea how things would turn out. She was able to articulate the significance Indianapolis had grown to hold for her. Her fiancé moved there for the rest of his life. Beyond a basketball deal, she has established relationships in that city. She had publicly shown her love for the Fever fanbase, which had expanded in tandem with the team's development over the previous 2 seasons. Nothing is guaranteed by any of that. In this industry, it seldom ever does. It does, however, ensure that Lexie Hull will always have something that cannot be negotiated or contracted away, no matter where she plays next. When she entered that building as a terrified 6th overall pick in 2022, she had no idea who she was as a person or as a player. She is aware of her potential when her surroundings complement her abilities. Instead of being a performer, she knows how to be a true teammate. She understands how to be open and honest about difficult situations without drawing attention to herself. She also understands what it's like to go from being on the verge of being forgotten to being at the center of the most talked about story in women's basketball, perhaps better than most others who have been in her shoes. Such expertise is uncommon. Long after the Caitlin Clark narrative has gone on to its next chapter, Lexie Hull is still worth watching because of the way she has decided to utilize it, generously, honestly, and without the shield that most athletes put up around their most vulnerable realities. Because the shadow was never the main focus of this. In spite of all, it was about what she created. She's only getting started. To ensure you don't miss anything, please leave a comment, subscribe, and turn on all alerts. Once you click the video on the screen, we'll see you in the next one.